Today we are going to talk about social influence, as in how we interact with people and how that interacts with our political beliefs and our values and opinions. Today's class should run pretty quickly. Most of what I'm covering is either wholly intuitive, as in you should just kind of get it, it makes sense, or is review. Socially transmitted political information is shorter and less accurate than media reporting. Shocker, I know. Basically, most people who are normal people and not, ivory tower nerd types like myself and my colleagues, get their information just by talking to people. Like you talk to your dad and your dad says, "Hey, it's not safe to fly home. Did you see that plane crash and the FAA, what they're doing?" And you're like, "No, I was too busy." I don't know, what are kids watching? Watching the Dodgers win their second World Series in a row. Boo. I'm sorry if you're a Dodgers fan, but you're on the wrong side of history. What else are they talking about here? Is the information that you get from talking to someone better, worse, or the same as if you are exposed to that stimulus directly from the news source? Yes, it is worse from the information. Sorry, it's worse from person to person. That doesn't relate at all to my notes. Another important point. Basically, if you're talking to someone who you know already agrees with you or someone that you respect, you're going to pay more attention to what they're saying. And if they are knowledgeable, that can offset the inaccuracy of that information. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. If you're talking to someone and you know that they're knowledgeable and you also respect what they have to say, you're going to pay more attention, and the information that you're going to get is going to be more accurate. And finally, this is important, socially transmitted learning, that's from person to person just talking, it reshapes evaluations of the news rather than like what you know specifically. I kind of disagree with this takeaway. I think it's limited by their data, but they're like, hey guys, this doesn't really impact how much people are learning. Everybody as a base level doesn't know that much. It is, however, shaping framing about things. So like, if a guy who's really annoying is talking to you at a bar about tariff politics, and you're like, he's like, it's really bad, and all this stuff, and that's going to shape how you think about that, versus like if you read the news or something like that, more than it is like you're not going to retain more information about that news story that way. I think that this is like an interesting paper. It's not the best, certainly not as interesting as the one I assigned for your grandma check this week, but I think it's really interesting. I think that it's not as negative as it might initially seem, right? Like the idea here is that as a subsidiary to other information consumption among people, talking to people about the news can be beneficial because you're kind of mediating how you think about things. You're getting different perspectives. And I want you guys to think about this as we go into this lecture, because like I think that we have this idea that deliberation is good and healthy, and in some contexts I think that Carlson would agree with this, that it is healthy and it is good to see these different frames, but only insofar as we have a solid baseline mutual understanding of what the facts of the case are. Do you have any questions about Carlson before we move on? Okay, so this lecture is going to examine how environments shape political attitudes and behavior, not just how institutions like interest groups, like what we talked about last class, influence us. It explores informal social influence, and that's how people's choices are molded by networks, by social norms, and by the context in which they live. Insert dated Kamala Harris meme here. You didn't just fall out of the coconut tree. She's right there. Politics rarely occurs in isolation, and that's kind of how we've been talking about political behavior, at least in information processing so far, as in something that happens in your head, or at least how a person interacts with an institution, not so much how a person interacts with other Joe Schmoes. We're going to talk about a few major frameworks that developed to kind of debate this way that we go about talking about politics as a community, and where that leads us to the modern day, and how modern technology and polarization change that psychological calculus. So let's talk about social context. What is social context defined by the discipline? Social context refers to environments, physical, social, or even digital, in which citizens' opinions form and they act politically. That's important because we're basically setting the scene. The setting of politics for most people is the social context in which they operate. This encompasses families, schools, congregations, basically anywhere that you are. And increasingly, social media networks. If you're spending a lot of time on Reddit forums, I don't know why you would, that's going to shape what communities you believe you're a part of. I don't know why I went to Reddit. None of you use Reddit. That's like aged me terribly. What the issue is that like TikTok and them, they don't really have a sense of community in the same way that like a chat board or a forum does, because someone is talking at you. See, I'm just like devolving here into like feeling old. These contexts serve as channels of social influence, and they transmit both cues and expectations about political behavior. You're going to get a sense from this that a lot of what we do and what we believe is just because we worry about what other people think about us, what is permissible in those communities we're a part of, and what station we want to have within those communities. Exposure to certain conversations and cues and symbols can normalize participation in the political scene or even discourage it. Some of you might be in friend groups that don't talk about politics at all, and it might even be a faux pas to bring it up. It might be, we are the apolitical friend group. We want to talk about, I was going to pull out another reference, but I know it's just going to be dated anyway. We want to talk about what we're eating for dinner instead of, Zoran Mamdani winning the New York presidential or New York mayoral election. So let's talk about some of these early theories. The earliest systematic studies of political influence come from the Columbia School in the 1940s. And they use these panel surveys, largely in the Northeast, to find that interpersonal discussion predicts vote choice more strongly than direct exposure to campaign messages. And that's important because it basically says, yeah, a campaign matters to some degree, but what really matters is if you can get a conversation going. What's going to impact someone's vote choice, how they behave tangibly in politics, is largely mediated by what they're talking about in their everyday life. These scholars describe a two-step flow of communication in which opinion leaders, as they frame it, those are trusted members of their community. Think a reverend in a church, or the leader of your local moose lodge or lions club. Again, this is the 1940s. Remember that. These opinion leaders interpret elite information and transmit it then through social networks. So you have the campaign and the elites in politics saying one thing, and then the people who actually pay attention to that are listening to it and they're reinterpreting it for their community. And then all of the people in the community think, oh, well, if Pastor Greg says that I should vote for this guy because the other guy is the spawn of Satan, then I'm going to vote for this guy. I don't want to vote for Satan. This model reframes politics as a social act rather than a kind of mechanical behavior. These networks create habits. We then move on to the Michigan model. So the Michigan school extends this social context theory to look at long-term political socialization. We've already covered this a little bit. You remember the American voter? We talked about this. They argue that partisan identity starts at an early age, it's inherited, and it's largely through family transmission, and then stabilizes through social environment. Your experiences become who you are and what you believe in politics. And this framework, I think, is a little bit more accurate, and it's newer, right? And it helps explain how shifts in the political environment, economic downturns, wars, a scandal from a politician may temporarily affect someone's opinions, but rarely have a long-term impact on their deeply held values, what makes up the stuff of them. Socialization then provides the emotional and cognitive foundations of political loyalties that are more enduring over time. It's not all party, you have inherent values or whatever, and that might just map onto certain politics. You are more robust as a person than I might have given you credit for so far in this class. We're going to talk about one of my least favorite pieces of scholarship that has come out of the discipline that is nonetheless one of the most important and widely read outside of the discipline. That is Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. This is Robert Putnam, and he's thinking about Wii Bowling. I'm very proud of this figure. Everybody enjoy it. He basically revisits in the late 90s and early 2000s this idea of civic consequences of social contact. He argues that voluntary associations, PTAs and moose lodges, and in the case of his book, community bowling leagues, generate social capital. Those are networks of trust and reciprocity that enable collective political action. Declining participation in these organizations, as he sees at the end of the 20th century, there is declining participation in them, erodes civic engagement and then democratic performance downstream from that. So less people are in these community organizations, less people are talking about politics, less people are developing these political attitudes, therefore less people are being engaged with politics, less people engaged in politics means less people are being represented, and democracy suffers. Putnam distinguishes between bonding social capital, which is inward-looking ties among similar people. So I am in the college Republicans, right? That would be bonding social capital. I am engaging with people who are like-minded individuals. And bridging social capitals, outward ties across differences. So maybe my college model UN, it's a bunch of people who are interested in politics, but it might have some college Democrats as well as some college Republicans, and I talk to them through that, and I have to engage with them on those terms, not just on the terms of the people who are already in my political party. Bridging social capital strengthens inclusivity and tolerance for differing opinions. So if you have to hang out with these people all the time, just because we're social people and we really don't like being uncomfortable and in awkward social situations, like you're in this club environment for your college UN. You're not just going to be a dick to all of the college Democrats when you have to hang out with them, once a week or whatever. Bonding capital can deepen insularity and partisan identity. And Putnam argues that the health of a democracy depends on maintaining both in a balance. Let's talk about neighborhoods. So political scientists increasingly have been emphasizing spatial dimensions of social context, largely because the advent of more powerful computing and more advanced statistical models allows us to leverage this data better. Neighborhood composition affects political behavior through both direct and indirect mechanisms. Homogeneous communities that look like each other, you see everybody has one of those little banners in their yard that says, like, we tolerate all people here, regardless of blah, 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 and then it has, like, the Jesus fish that says evolve in it, or something like that. Or you, like, go down another street, and there's MAGA flag after MAGA flag after MAGA flag. Definitely not self-reporting for my hometown in rural Pennsylvania. Homogeneous communities like that reinforce consensus and, more importantly, conformity. There's this dynamic, the keeping up with the Joneses, right? Where even if you want to be a pretty little flower and an individual in your community, at the end of the day, whatever the HOA says goes. And if you don't have an HOA, it's still pressure from your neighbors to, if you have like a really outspoken Trump fan as your neighbor and you really don't want to just like get in fights with them constantly, maybe you don't put your Jesus evolved fish out on your lawn because it's just not worth arguing with them. Americans are more conflict averse than I think we give them credit for. Some of you are thinking, no, I would absolutely get in a fight with my neighbor. You people are crazy. Heterogeneous communities expose individuals to competing viewpoints and can also depress participation due to conflict avoidance. This is what I'm talking about. Over recent decades, Americans have become more geographically sorted by party identification, a process that is known as the Big Sort. The residential polarization aligns social identity with political identity, which reduces cross-cutting interactions and amplify national division even at the local level. Where you live is one of the last bastions of truly incidental community engagement. If you live in a building in a large city that is a co-op, you are not choosing the specific people who live with you. If you enter into a community with an HOA and you want to serve on that HOA board, if you enter into a community, you don't have a choice of who is serving on your school board, specifically as in like, I don't choose that my options are Karen, Smith or Douglas Jones, right? Those aren't the people that you're choosing. It's incidental communication, and you have to interact with them, right? Your kids go to the same school with Douglas Jones's kids, so you're both on the PTA, and you have to interact with them that way. But we are becoming geographically sorted. There are Democratic cities. There are Republican rural areas. There are communities that bill themselves as this is where Republicans should live. This is where Democrats should live. And so these incidental communications are becoming more and more homogenized. Robert Putnam is shaking in his boots and crying because how are we going to get bowling leagues when people can't agree? Where's this? Yeah, it's Colombia. This is a map of the economic breakdown of Colombia. If I overlaid who votes for what party over this, it would basically just follow along economic lines, right? So the green areas are wealthier. They vote farther to the center or Republican than the areas that are poor. You also could overlay a racial map on this, and it would look exactly the same. The poor areas are black, the rich areas are white. If you overlaid a redlined map for how Colombia used to be redlined, it is the exact same way. If you don't know what redlining is, ask someone who studies that. I don't want to explain it right now. So, if communities are fucked, where do we go? The office, everyone's favorite place to talk about politics, right? Social institutions provide enduring context for political communication, and workplaces are one of the last bastions of this because everybody has got to have a job. Workplaces bring together individuals across class or partisan lines, less so class lines, and even less so partisan lines these days, facilitating the diffusion of political information. Congregations, your church, meanwhile, frame political questions in moral terms and provides dense organizational networks for mobilizations. You might think that's a rather outdated thing to bring up, church membership. However, church membership, religious membership in the United States is rising. Increasingly, also, religious organizations are becoming political. They've always been political, but they're becoming more blunt about it. This is something to pay attention to. Young people of your generation are, by and large, much more religious than millennials are. It's because we're poor. Each of these institutions structures exposure to ideas and norms, shaping how individuals interpret politics. Difference in institutional participation thus contributes to variation in civic knowledge, tolerance, and engagement across social groups. Basically, what groups you are in determines how informed you are, and how informed you are informs how much you participate. Let's talk about social media. Robert Putnam is still shaking in his boots because what's the new television? It's cell phones! Digital networks reproduce the social context mechanisms that we see outside of digital platforms. It's basically the world that you engage in out here with political behavior, but you like have it do a few lines of cocaine and then it operates really fast, and that is digital platforms and politics. Social media platforms facilitate networked influence, and information spreads rapidly through interpersonal ties, often bypassing traditional gatekeepers. This can be good, right? Maybe these traditional gatekeepers, interest groups, politicians, parties, they're keeping messages that would be popular among the mass public down. This is largely an argument for the success of Zoran Mamdani's campaign. He won 9% of voters who voted for Donald Trump simply because he was talking about affordability. Because both Democrats and Republicans haven't been talking about how expensive it is to live in the modern era. So that's one thing. But also, bypassing traditional gatekeepers means that you get stuff like QAnon. Batshit insane online conspiracy theories that result in people tearing their lives and their families apart. So let's talk about norms. This figure is insane. I found that. I looked up conformity, and this was a picture that I found. I just wanted to share it with you guys. Crazy. Behavioral research demonstrates that social pressure is one of the strongest predictors of political participation. If you believe that your friends will know that you voted, right? So like you live in North Carolina, where you can look up whether or not someone voted. You will more likely vote because there is a certain kind of prestige that you get from voting, right? If your friend group says like, you didn't vote, what the fuck are you doing, right? You're going to be more likely to vote, especially when people can validate that. That's validated by a Gerber, Green, and Larimer study in 2008, but it's intuitively true. It makes sense, right? Similar peer effects appear in online networks where visible engagement, likes, shares, reposts. You guys were pretty young with this, but remember during like the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 where everyone was posting like the black square thing, right? Like that's an example of this peer pressure to participate in certain ways that are largely performative online. Political expression then, especially in polarized environments, is shaped less by abstract conviction about certain values that you might have, than it is, shaped by the desire to belong. You don't want to be seen as othered. Context, therefore, defines not only what people believe, but what they admit to believing. Have you ever sat down with someone that you just met, you're talking to them about things, and they start oversharing, and you realize that this person is actually insane? It's a matter of social permissibility. They're not going to come out the gate saying, I believe in hollow earth theory is the first thing they say. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, you love dogs? I love dogs. I have a dog. It's a Rhodesian Ridgeback. Don't you guys love my dog? And then 3 hours later, they'll get to the hollow earth theory thing, right? It's not the first thing that comes out of their mouth. Social context helps explain why polarization deepens even without new issues. People cluster within homogeneous social or digital environments, and this leads to them encountering reinforcing views that intensify attitude strength. So if people are not having these incidental interactions with people who disagree with them, if there is not the social pressure to conform to something that is cross-cutting and deliberative, and they are just stuck in their echo chambers, they are going to become more intransigent in the beliefs that they have. Reducing polarization then requires expanding bridging social ties that expose citizens to alternative perspectives. This is Putnam's argument. This logic that talking to people will decrease this kind of polarization is reframes polarization as not merely ideological, but a kind of rational process in our head. If you are talking through these things, it becomes more, you get more utility in your social life from being deliberative than being a polarized partisan. There are more incentives for you socially to be agreeable politically with other people and hear them out than there are for you to say, no, you're fucking wrong, go fuck yourself, I hate you. And I just like this image too. The Dallas Cowboys can disrespectfully suck it. Go Birds. Big takeaways here. Social context transforms abstract political preferences into lived experience. Citizens learn, deliberate, and act through their social environments. These contexts then transmit norms, what's acceptable. They set boundaries, what you can and cannot do in certain social contexts, and condition political expression then, right? If we go back to these guys here, right? They have been conditioned to think that this kind of political expression is acceptable in that environment. Do you think these guys go to their day jobs dressed like this? Probably not. I mean, maybe. Pretty cool if they do, I guess. Like, even credit to the Cowboys guy. That's belief there, but like, they've been conditioned. Current research shows that digital and physical networks share the same kind of logic, the same underpinning mechanisms. They reinforce, they push for conformity, and it encourages selective exposure. All of this leads to perhaps not great things for democracy.